Welcome, everyone. We are doing the Back to Basics Forms and Sheets session today. And today I'm here with my team. We have on today Alicia Gallegos Butters. She's the Director of Educational Technology. We also have on today Jessica. I'm Carrie. I'll be doing our presentation today on forms and sheets. We have Pam Braben and we have Chris Garcia on today, and they'll be supporting with the chat and any kind of questions that you have as we go through. And I wanted to just point out some upcoming events that we have. So if you're interested in joining our AR/VR network meeting, other Back to Basics Google trainings, our Ed Tech Network, or our esports coaching clinic, you can sign up using the registration links within the slideshows. And Alicia, I see that you have your hand raised, so I just want to see if you wanted to chime in. You're on mute, Alicia. All right. So today we're going to be talking about forms, and we'll also be talking about Google Sheets. And this is a Back to Basics series. So really, as we go through, feel free to follow along. We're going to just be getting into the basics of each of the platforms, and then a few things to leave you feeling like you know some tips and tricks and exciting new features as well. And so we're going to start off by looking at forms. And you can go to forms by going to forms.new in your browser. You can also go to forms.google.com. And this is a great place to start when you're creating forms because it gives you form templates. And so you'll notice here that there are some templates in here that are really geared toward teachers. So they have exit tickets that you can automatically use and adjust for your class. They have worksheets. They've got blank quizzes. And today we'll talk a little bit about how to make a quiz using forms. Additionally, if you click on this template gallery, you can find other general templates, including assessment templates. You can do ones for RSVPs and other things that you might be using not with your class, but for parent type of communication, surveys, things that you might be doing within the back-end administration of your classroom. So I wanted to showcase that. And if you're following along, we're going to go to this plus sign to create a blank form. Once you do that, it gives you a very generic opportunity to create a form. And when I say Google Forms, this is really, when you think about it, kind of a way to create either a survey or a quiz of some form. So if you're wanting to create a survey, it'll be something where you're polling people and then you're getting responses. If you're looking to create more of a quiz, then you can actually have it auto grade and things like that. So either way, it's a great tool for your classroom. And to start, you can title your form. And give your form a description. Then we have the question. Sorry, did someone have a question? All right, so then we have the question option. And here you're going to put your question text. And you can put in the options. And so you can put in the correct answer, you can add in additional answers. And if you want to add an option of other, you can add that too. This is a multiple choice question, but what's really nice about forms is that you can do multiple choice, you can do short answer, paragraph. So short answer is really short. It'll only be about a sentence. Paragraph will allow your students or whomever is responding to your form to actually write quite a bit more, a full paragraph, a couple of paragraphs. Checkboxes are useful if you want to give people who are taking your test or your survey multiple options. So if you do checkboxes, they can check more than one option. Drop down is similar to multiple choice, except that it presents itself as a drop down where you select one. You can do a file upload, and this is useful if you're collecting forms or information or some type of assignment from your students or from parents. You can do it through a file upload. We have a linear scale, which is nice. It's like the 1 to 5 scale. Rate this training. How much did you learn on a scale of 1 to 5? There are also options for a multiple choice grid and a checkbox grid, and these can be useful for scheduling. They can also be useful if you are creating something like a Likert scale where you have multiple options, and for each option, you're having people rate their awareness of it. And then there are options to do questions for date and time. So that's basically the question types you can create in forms. And I just want to check in the chat and give an opportunity to see if there are any questions.
No questions, Carrie. They're just getting the resources to everybody.
Perfect. All right. So once you have your first question, you can add other questions by hitting this plus symbol. Additionally, you can import questions from another form. So if you have multiple forms that you've created, you can easily import questions in. You can add titles and descriptions. And this is useful because it actually will create a text box for you. So sometimes if you have a certain training that there's legal information you might want to include, you can have just a text box within your form. You can also just add an image within your form or a video. So if you wanted students to watch a video and then you can have questions about that video, you can add that there. And what we're going to do next is we're going to focus on this equal sign, because what this does is it creates sections. And just by a show of virtual hands or thumbs up for those of you who have their camera on, how many of you have heard about using forms to create differentiation for your students, or maybe a choose your own adventure type of thing? I see a couple. Great. So with this equals button, this is how you create those choose your own adventures or those differentiated assessments for your students. So you add a section, and in this section, and in this case, we'll do, since it's a math skills one, we'll do additional math practice. And so my goal is if students get this wrong, then they're going to have another question to practice. And so now we have our section, we have an additional question for practice. And once we've done this, then when we go back to the original question, we can hit the 3-dot more options icon and select go to a section based on your answer. And once you do that, you'll have the option to start branching to the correct section. And so 2 plus 2 is 4. So if my student gets this correct, I know that they're good to go. I can have them submit the form. If they say that it's 6, they might need some extra practice. So I'm going to send them to section 2. And if they say something else, I'm also going to have them do additional practice. And so that is how you would use forms to set up differentiation for your students. And just so you can see it, this eyeball allows you to preview your form. And so now we have that my email's here. We have our first question. So what is 2 plus 2? If somebody hits 6 and then they hit next, oops, they're going to be taken to this extra practice. If instead they hit the correct answer of 4 and they hit next, the form will be submitted. So now I can see that my form is doing exactly what I want it to do. And if I wanted to go back and edit my form further, I can hit this pencil icon, or I can just jump back to the original tab. So those are the basics of creating questions and also the basics of creating differentiation within your forms. As you move through your forms, you can also duplicate questions. So if you want to make it easy for yourself to copy some of the language and the answer choices, you can duplicate. You can delete questions, and you can make questions required. So if students need to answer certain questions, just toggle over the required button. Additionally, if you're doing this for students, you may want to shuffle the order options so that all students aren't seeing the same things and they don't have as much of an opportunity to copy. And so once we've set up our form, we have some settings that we can toggle over. So in this case, because it's about math, I do want to make it a quiz. And so I can toggle over this, make this a quiz. And after I've done that, I have some options here related to quizzes. So is it going to release the grades immediately, or do I want to manually review? Am I going to turn on locked mode if my students are using Chromebooks? What happens when students miss questions, get the correct answer? What are my point values? I might want to set default points. And just to show you, because I've toggled over this, make this a quiz, now I have in my main question screen this answer key option. And so from here, I can now add answer feedback for incorrect and correct answers. And I love this so much. I can also add in a video. So if students get an incorrect answer, I can refer them to a video or a link for more information. And then I can also add point values. And so this now is a quiz that can potentially be auto-graded. It can give immediate feedback to students, super useful. You can even give them more content that they can continue on with. Additionally, within our settings tab, we can manage responses. And so you have a few different options for responses. You can choose to collect email addresses. These can be either verified, which means that they're Google accounts, or responders can input an email address, or you can choose not to collect. So if you're creating an anonymous survey just to get students' input on something, you can opt to not collect those addresses. You can decide whether you want to send a copy of responses. Can students respond and edit their responses? And then this one will be important for those of you who are working within districts. You'll want to make sure, usually by default, this one is toggled, which means that if your district has this turned on, only people who have usernames and email addresses within your organization can respond. So a lot of times if you have created forms before and you've had trouble where people couldn't fill it out, this might have been why. So if you are handing it out to parents or people who aren't within the organization, you'll want to toggle this off. You can limit to one response. You can also adjust how the form is presented. So if it's a long form, you might want to show a progress bar. If you're doing it for students, you may want to shuffle the question order. You can also allow for a confirmation message. And by default, it says your response has been recorded, but you might want to make it a lot more friendly, or you could point to extra information. You can also, if there's a survey, share some of the results with participants. And if you're making a lot of forms, it might be useful to set some defaults for your forms that you can just have automatically. For example, if you're always creating questions that are required, it might be useful to require by default. And I'm going to just check in and see how the chat is going.
It's going well. We've had a couple questions about short answer and the fact that it won't grade a short answer. And so, but that was taken care of. And just that we need to, if you want it to grade, we have to be very specific, and it's either multiple choice or short or checkbox.
Perfect. Yeah. And so once you have created your settings, your questions, you can adjust the theme. So it's always nice to adjust the way that your quiz or your survey is created. And so you can change the font of the header. You can change the font of the question, of the text. You can choose a header image. And so there are plenty here that you can use. You can also find them online if you Google it. And this makes it just a nice way to personalize that assessment for your students. And once you do that, you'll notice that the colors are adjusted too, and you can continue to manually adjust the colors for the background and for your form as a whole. Once you've done that, you can preview it again to make sure you like it. And then you are at the sending phase. And so if you hit the send button, you'll be able to send your form via an email, where if you type in names, you can have this form included directly in an email so someone can fill it out through the email. You can send it as a link. You can embed it into a class website or something like that. You can also do Facebook or Twitter. And when you have it as this included in an email and you're typing in email addresses, you'll also have the option to add an editor. And so this would be someone who can actually go back in and adjust and edit your form rather than just taking your assessment. Once you're done with that, you hit send. And that allows you to collect responses from people, which you can then see in this responses tab. And so within responses, you will see all of the responses that exist. And I probably should link to or find one that has responses, but just know that you will have responses here. You'll have the option to see based on questions. You'll have the option to see based on the individuals who have taken it if you've collected email addresses. And what's really nice is that this links directly to Sheets. So once you've created a form, it synchronizes with Google Sheets. And if I click on this, I can have it create a new spreadsheet, or I can select an existing spreadsheet and my form results will show up in that spreadsheet.
Hi, I'm calling for Dr. Day.
Sorry, can we? Thank you. So that takes us to our Google Sheets.
Carrie, before you move on, there's a question. Can we have a deadline for completing the form?
That is a great question. So there are add-ons that you can do, and let me show you through here. If you go to add-ons, you can actually add certain programs. And I think there was one that I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, but at the end, I can look it up and put it in the chat, the very last bit, or someone else can find it for me. But there is one that you can use to make a deadline for completing the form. Otherwise, what you can do is when you're done accepting responses, you don't want to accept it anymore, you can just manually toggle this over and then people can't respond anymore. So it just depends if you want it to be automatic. There are add-ons. If not, you'll just hit the toggle. Great question. All right. Any other forms questions? So we'll jump into Sheets, and just like forms, you can get to Sheets by going to sheets.new, or you can go to sheets.google.com. And I have a demonstration spreadsheet just to show you some of the main things that I think are really useful within the classroom. And some of these are also useful in whatever kind of administrative work you're doing, working with parents, working with students, working with office staff. So to start with, a lot of people ask questions with Sheets where they worry about the data and who's able to see it and if they share it out with people, because one of the nicest parts of Google is that you're able to collaborate and share. There's a lot of worry when you start sharing your information that people are going to mess it up. So a few things that I would say to start, you do, just like with all of the other Google applications, have the option to go to a version history. And so you can see once you've shared with someone all of the previous versions, you can see who has adjusted the spreadsheet and you can restore previous versions. So this can help alleviate any of that worry that if you share it with someone, they're going to completely mess up your spreadsheet. Additionally, you can always make a copy with any of these before you share it out, just to make sure that you have the initial integrity of your sheet. And then you get to the idea of student information and personal identifiable information. And so it's just always really important as you're thinking about sharing things to think about making sure to maintain the integrity of student information and privacy. Now, in addition to all of that, as you're thinking about it, there is an option that you can do to protect your sheets. And so if you go to the Data tab, you can protect specific sheets and ranges. And so to do that, you just click into Data, Protect Sheets and Ranges, and then you can add either a sheet or a range, and you can set permissions. And so once you set permissions, you can restrict who can edit a range. And so that way you don't have to worry about anyone touching your work. You can also show a warning when someone else is editing the range. So while this still doesn't take away people's ability to view the content, it certainly helps with making sure that people aren't editing things that you don't want them to. And so I always think that it's really important to be able to protect your sheets. In terms of how you view your information, some other things that are really useful are freezing. So when you are able to, and you'll notice it with this form right here, when you are creating spreadsheets, it's really useful to have those header rows that are frozen so that as you scroll, they stay visible. And so to do that, you simply click on a row or a column, and under View, you can go to Freeze, and you can freeze one row, you can freeze two rows. Another little trick that I really like is, if you notice here, you can only freeze up to 2 rows, but if maybe I wanted to freeze 6 rows, I can go to Help, and when I search the menu, I can type in freeze, and now I have the option to freeze up to whatever my rows are. And so if you wanted to freeze more rows than you originally have through this view menu, you can do that through the help option. So view, freeze, we'll freeze just the one header row for now. And now as I scroll up, I still have my header row, and I can freeze my column. And so as I go to the left, I'll still have that column. And this is also really helpful as you sort data, because then it makes sure that it doesn't mess with your header rows or your header columns as you sort. And so for this one, I am going to unfreeze the column and just keep my header row. And if I wanted to sort my sheet now, I can go to Data, and I can sort by column A. So I want to sort by name, and I can sort from A to Z. And it's going to take all the information with me. I can sort from Z to A. And then it's going to, again, take all of that information with us. And if I wanted to see it in a different way, I can also create something called a filter. And filters are great ways to drill down your view so that you see what you want to see. And so, for example, if I click onto this little filter icon that appears, I can now start filtering by condition. So maybe if I filter by values, I can take off any of my female students here and only see my male students. Let's see. And now I am only seeing what I want to see. And so you can set up filter views really quickly and easily depending on what you want. Okay. And I'm going to just quickly jump out of my filters. And so these are just some tips for how to view, sort, filter, and protect your sheets. But now let's get into formatting sheets, because a lot of us really, we have some information. Maybe we made a form, we collected some data, and we want it to look easy and clear. So the first tip was that freezing the row. But some other things that might be useful for you, and intentionally, I did it so that this column right here is, I can't see what it says. And so there are a couple of different options when you have text that is extending into the other column. The first thing is you can highlight a cell and you can click on this curved arrow between two lines, and that's going to wrap your text for you. And so that can be a good option because it allows you to just have all of the text within one cell. However, to me, that still doesn't look exactly the way that I wanted it to look. So instead, I can double click on the column line, so the line that goes in between the column, and that automatically resizes that column to be the right size based on the size of the text. And so in this case, I like that better. But if I had a really long set of text, I might choose to wrap it. The other thing that you can do is you can create a line within your cell. And so to do that, you can hit on Control plus Enter, or on a Mac, it's Option and Enter. And now I can hit student 10, and I can put in my name, or Alicia's name in this case, and then I can put in her email address. And so I can put in all of this information and it's clearly lined up using line breaks. And I'll type into the chat. So that was Control plus Enter, or Option plus Return. And that's in your job aid as well. So those are ways you can create line breaks. Some other fancy things that you can do with your text. If I have this header row and I want to adjust how the text is displayed, I can hit this text rotation, which has the A on top of the arrow pointing to the right. And now I can make my header row tilt up. I can make it tilt up and down. I can make it tilt the other way. And so I can start to really adjust the heading the way that I want it to look. And of course, up here, just like in Google Docs or in any of the Google apps, you have all of these options to change the font size. You can do the fill color. So you can start to really adjust all of those things as well. But these are some of those that are unique to Sheets, this text wrapping and the text rotation. And the one other thing in terms of just formatting that I think is really useful, it's not unique to Sheets, but I do find it to be really important, and especially when I'm using Google Sheets. So sometimes we're copying information from one website into another website or into a sheet. And so, for example, and I'll show you a word list in a second. So this will relate to that. But if I have this word list and I wanted to copy all of these words, obviously the formatting is really different from the formatting in our sheet. But I've now hit copy. And when I go back to here, I want it to paste in just like a word list here. I don't want it to be anything special. I don't want it to be all over the place. So I can hit Command Shift V or Control Shift V on a Windows device. And from there, it takes the text and it pastes it just like the format within my sheet. So this just saved me a ton of time, because otherwise I would have had text that was completely different and I would have had to go in and fix the spacing and match it to meet my other text. So this is super useful. Any questions? Looks like we're good.
Does it work that way on a Mac as well?
Yep, so on a Mac, it's Command Shift and V. And you can also do, when you go to edit, you can go to paste special, and then you can paste values only. So and actually this is really nice because within Sheets, you can decide if you want to paste values only, so it will just paste the content, format only, so it's like the format copier, the paint roller, so you can copy a format like this by hitting the format, then the paint formatter, and adjust the format that way. Or from that paste special, you can actually just copy formulas over. So if there's a formula you want to copy from one cell into another, you can do that too. Great question. Okay. So we've now covered how we can basically take our format and make it the most useful for us. And now we start to get into the data of it. So here we have an example of some data that we might have, just a super simple student assignment. And it's Sheets. So what can we actually do with this, and how can we do it quickly and easily so we don't have to do a lot of work? And with that, the first thing that I would say is that if you highlight information and you look at the bottom, there's this quick calculator. It's called the Quick Stats tool. And so without doing anything on our end, we don't need to know any functions or formulas. We just highlight what data we want to see. And then we go to this Quick Stats. And now we have the sum of that column, the average of that column, the minimum value, the maximum value, the count, and the count numbers. So that's giving us the amount of cells, and then it's giving us the actual amount of numbers within the cells. And so now, without doing anything, knowing any formulas or functions, we've just seen some of the most basic and useful ones that we might use in the classroom. Now, if instead we thought, okay, that's useful, but maybe there's another function, and a function is just what you want to do with your data. Maybe there's another function that I want to do, and it wasn't one of those quick stats. So what I can do instead with my data highlighted is I can go to this functions button. It's the sum icon. And so when we click on this sum icon, what it does is it gives you the most common things that people ask for, and then it has different categories. And so based on the category, it has different options of what you might want to do. And as soon as you click into one of those, and I am just going to go with something basic like sum because my data goes really well with that, it's going to do the sum for me, and it's going to show me what that formula is. So now I don't remember the formulas all the time, perhaps, and that's a great way to see the formula and be able to kind of easily manipulate it and adjust it to your data without having to remember each formula by itself. So in addition to that quick stats, you can do that sum button, and that provides you with a list of functions that you can then manipulate to fit your data. And the last thing that we can look at with our data in a really quick way is by going to Tools. And let me highlight one more time. So from Tools, I can go to this Explore tool. And Alicia previewed the Explore tool on Docs, and it gave us lots of options that we could do within our Google Docs to add content and images and things like that. The Explore tool here is really meant for your data and your sheets. And so now what it does is it gives me those quick stats again. It allows me to ask tailored questions about my data. So now if I had specific things, how many students got 9s on this assessment? Provide a histogram of assignment 1. What's the most common grade? It provides all of these tailored answers based on your specific highlight. You can easily adjust the formatting. So maybe I wanted to make this alternating colors. And I think this one's probably the most useful. It gives you analysis charts that it thinks that might be relevant to you. So you can then go and you can take this and you can copy it and you can add this into a document to show your results. You can add it into a website. You can add it anywhere, and you can either link it or you can leave it unlinked. And so now you've had this quick generated chart, which You can also go in and insert a chart from here and adjust charts as you go. But here, this just recommends it for you. And so either way, they're both really useful. But I like the Explore tool because it tailors it to the data that you have selected. So it's always going to be different, and it's just going to give you suggestions. Gonna
How
take
do you get to explore?
from the tools menu and then explore. And just make sure you have your data highlighted. Otherwise, you won't be able to see the explore for it. Okay, so I am going to also clear my formatting, and sometimes that's useful. So if you go to format, you can always clear formatting, and I'm just going to do that so that I can show you this next thing, which is that with your data, you can go in and you can go to format and you can do something called conditional formatting. And this will be a visual cue to you when you need to look at certain data points. And so if I go to format, conditional formatting, I can do a single color. So for example, my format rule, I'm really concerned if my students have gotten less than, we'll say 3. So when they have less than a 3, I want it to be in red. Wow, I really need to focus on this. Then if they have greater than, and then I change it to 14, and I change the color, now I can see which students need kind of extension activities, which students need extra support, and it's all there for me really quickly and easily. The other thing I can do, and I'm just, again, deleting my formatting here. I can go in and I can do conditional formatting. And I can do a color scale. So if I want my students to be kind of ranked so that the minimum values are in red and the maximum values are in green, I can now, and oh, this is a super outlier, so let me change that. So now I can start to have this really clear heat map of how my students are doing, and that can help me to do grouping, that can help me to know who needs extra support, and I have it all visually easy to see, and it was super quick. Okay. Gonna again. Okay. Any questions before I continue?
Look, Carrie, it looks like everything's been covered in the chat, so you're good to move on unless somebody has another one that they didn't put there.
Awesome. Okay. So I also, before we move into just some of my favorite special formulas and things that I think are really useful, I do want to point out that if you are formatting your functions, you always need an equal sign. So that's like the trigger that's going to tell you what you're going to do next. And so once the equal sign comes up, that means that you're inserting a function in there. From there, Google will generally autofill. So depending on what you type, it will start to autofill what it thinks that you want to put in. And so you can collect by clicking directly on it, or you can adjust it by changing those values. You'll also notice that there are these parentheses. So you always need to have a beginning and an ending parenthesis for a formula to work. And if you're trying to do a formula and it's not working, it will highlight what's wrong with it with or underline what's wrong with it with like a little purple line. And so that will give you a clue as well as like a little pop-up that tells you that you need to fix your formula. So let me demonstrate now just some of these really useful quick formulas that I think might be interesting. So here I put an English word. And this could be useful if you're trying to do a word list or you're having your students do translations and you want to create, you know, some kind of activity for them. So I have English words here. And one function that I love from Sheets is the Google Translate function. And so I'm going to put in equals. And then, as I mentioned, it'll start to pop up as I type. So I typed in GO, and now I can do Google Translate. And this one, I want to translate this word. And I want to translate it from the original language, which is EN for English. And I want to translate it into Spanish, which is ES. And I'll share a link so that you can see all of the different language codes as they apply in Google Translate. So you can do this in multiple languages. And once I do that, it's going to load and it's going to give me the Spanish word. Now, if you're just thinking about doing this for one word, it's probably not worth it. But what's really amazing within Sheets is that there's this magic fill option. And magic fill will magically fill lots of different things. So it'll fill, in this case, it'll pull down the formula for my list. And now within just a second, I have this fully translated list. So that's one way that you can use magic fill. And that's one function that I like in Google Translate. Magic fill can also be used within text. And so here I have this calendar text. And if I highlight, for example, Wednesday through Tuesday, because I want the next values to be going Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, and I pull it over, my magic fill will recognize my pattern and continue. And notice it skips Saturday, Sunday. But instead, oops. If it doesn't see that I've skipped that Saturday, Sunday, by default, it will include those weekends. And so it recognizes whatever types of patterns you have. Additionally, if you just highlight one cell, it will pull down that cell and only that cell. So the cell value will be pulled down. So that's a really interesting thing that can help save you quite a lot of time. Any questions on that? It looks like we're still good on the chat. So, all right. Some other things that I think come up kind of frequently when you are looking at data, and I'm going to clear my formatting again and remove my conditional formatting. So you'll notice here that I have some duplicates, and sometimes you'll submit or have people submit a form and they'll submit it twice. You forgot to toggle off that they're only allowed to do something once. You have registrations, people register twice. You might want to remove duplicates from your data. And so if that happens, you can highlight your data, and then under the data tab, you can go to data cleanup and you can select remove duplicates. And now you'll notice that it removed my double Joe Black and all of his information. And so that's a quick way that you can just start to highlight cells and remove any duplicates that are in your data. Another thing that I think happens pretty frequently is we'll get information in one format. For example, we have these first name, last names together, but we didn't want them together. Maybe we wanted them to be separate. And if that happens, what you can do is you can highlight, and then you can go to data, and you can go to split text to columns. And so when I split my text to columns, it asks me, how am I going to separate this? And I look at it and think, okay, I'm going to add a space. And now my data is in first name and last name. And that's the way I maybe wanted it. If for some reason that wasn't the way I wanted it, I can also use a function to put it back. And so there's one called concatenate. And what that does is it lets you join text together. And so from here, I want to join this text and I want to put a space. So whenever you want to put certain text, you just put it in quotes. So quote, space, quote. And then I want to put my last name. And now it's going to autofill for me and all my names are going to be back together. So I want to pause for a second and just see if there are any kind of questions about setting up formulas, any of the functions, things that you want to see more of.
Is there like a cheat sheet somewhere that we could, like, just to remember all this is really hard? Is there, what would you suggest for, like, I mean, you could just Google it. I know you can ask questions, which is what I usually do. But I didn't know if there was maybe another tool that would show you kind of what options you have or whatever.
Yeah, so a couple of things. The first is that almost all of these are in this additional features PowerPoint, which is going to be in that back to basics folder we shared out at the beginning. Then in addition to that, you can always use this help icon and start searching for different things. So if there's something specific that you know you want to do, like removing duplicates, you can type it in and it brings you right to that. So you don't have to remember where things are. And then the other really useful one that I would look toward would just be looking at this function and then seeing what it says under the different categories. And so, for example, if I am thinking about Google, well, what does Google offer me? There's the ability to detect language. And so now what I could do with that vocabulary list is I could do the opposite. I could have my list and then I could put in a formula to figure out what language it's using. Maybe I'm looking for things that relate to text. And so then like this one, very useful. You can do proper case and it will turn all of your text into capitalized first letter and lowercase everything else. And so looking through these, it gives you the exact formula and then what you need to create that. And so I think that that would probably be the most useful to just kind of like peruse. And then if you have something specific in mind, to use the help menu. Any other questions? Okay. Does anyone want to see a couple more tricks and let me actually send you also the translate document so that you can easily find those translations.
Quick question.
Mhm.
How can you print certain columns only? Or do you have to print out the whole thing?
So couple of things for that. One is that you can absolutely do a filter view where if you go to your data, you can create filter views and those are going to give you whatever view you want to print. You can also hide. So if you select certain rows, you can hide them and then print what you want. The other thing so let me just show you that for a second. So if I only wanted to print certain things, I could hide them. And then you'll notice just this little black arrow appears and you can double click and that will re-show my rows. And then from your print screen, you can set custom page breaks and things like that and adjust your sheets and your selected cells. So I could technically adjust, like highlight certain cells and then select my cells that way, or just select certain sheets from here. So there are some different options for that. And let me find those translate. Here's the link to all of the translate codes that you can use. And so we do have a couple more minutes, so happy to answer any other questions. If not, just some of the other things that I think are really useful. Like I said, if you're looking to capitalize or lowercase whole values of things, you can do something like equals lower and then select your cell and it'll lowercase the whole cell. And again, if I had done this here, where I insert columns, I can pull down any of my formulas so that it's super easy to navigate. Also, another thing that might be useful for you, you can go to insert and you can insert checkboxes. So you could make to-do lists for your students or for yourself using checkboxes that you can check into. You can also insert notes. And so if you want, when people hover over it, you'll notice there's this little black arrow in the corner that when you hover over it, it pops up, but it won't affect any of your functions or formulas. So that can be useful too. And if you're typing in certain values and you hit the @ sign, you can actually add something called a smart chip. And those smart chips will give you all of the information for that person if that person is within like your district or your organization's emails. And so sometimes you might want to do something like that as well. Okay. Oh, the magic fill. So the little blue that pops up at the kind of right corner of any of your cells, that's your magic fill, and it will really just depend on whatever you have highlighted. So in this case, it's going to drop down Cindy Smith. Actually, it won't, apparently. In that case, it's going to drop down the number 2. But if I typed in 2, 4, 6, and I highlighted that, it's going to drop down that pattern. So 2, 4, 6, 8, things like that. And just some other tips as you go. If you want to highlight all of the cells, you can hold down the Shift key and that highlights everything. If you want to highlight random cells, you can hold down the Control or Command key, and then that will highlight cells that aren't in a row. Okay, I think I'm going to pause the recording now, but still open if you have any questions.